Of course, as we discussed the last two remaining disciples, it is extremely difficult just to focus on Simon's Zealots, since Judas Iscariot, of course, is the last and most infamous of the apostles we'll be discussing. As a brief self-disclosure that ties into Judas' betrayal of Jesus, I remember a story from my time being a shift coordinator at a local reform school. One night, when I was conducting routine third shift house inspections, I immediately detected the presence of contraband emanating out of one of the residents' rooms. In response, I was welcomed by a cloud of smoke that hit my face as I eventually entered the room, along with discovering a wet towel on the floor and another draped across the door. Requiring assistance, I had asked the two residential staff members that were monitoring the house to assist me in my reporting and to discover any additional contraband that might have been circulating due to the incident. Out of the two residential staff members, one was a clinician at the facility that had temporarily chosen to act as a residential counselor that was working nights to make some extra money. It was this staff member that refused to get up from her laptop from the couch she was sitting in and help with the incident at hand that was transpiring that night. As a result, such noncompliance and incompetence were rightfully noted in my report. Fast forwarding 2 weeks later, I was called not to the residential or clinical director's office, but to the chief executive officer's office, where I was told that a staff member had made a complaint that I was taking children out of their beds at night to conduct my security checks against their will. Can you guess which staff member had made the fabricated complaint against me? Perhaps you can guess why she skipped my supervisor and manager in filing such a report. Buddha once indicated that
holding on to anger is like grasping a hot coal with the intent of throwing it at someone else. However, you are the one that gets burned.
In the aforementioned story, like a similar story you'll hear surrounding Judas, despite my written rebuke of the clinician that was acting as residential staff was indeed warranted. I had embarrassed her twofold when I conducted the write-up. First, I provided evidence that the staff member was improperly monitoring the rooms, as required by her acting position, through conducting safety checks of the residents. And I also properly documented the clinician's refusal to assist me during this incident when I was professionally asking for assistance. In response, this clinician, who thought they were higher professionally than me at the time, had their ego and reputation tarnished and wanted revenge. When it comes to Judas Iscariot, he betrayed Jesus not for a measly 30 pieces of silver that is worth roughly about $300 in today's monetary value, but due to his pride that you'll hear about in today's story, that his actions were in response to a rebuke that Jesus had given Judas Iscariot, and Judas consequently wanting revenge. All right, let's get started. Simon Zealots. Before we make our way to Judas, we must first discuss Simon Zealots. He was known as the 11th apostle and was also known as a man of intense passion, loyalty, and conviction, whose journey from a fiery Jewish nationalist to a devoted follower of Jesus exemplifies the transformative power of faith. Chosen by Simon Peter, he was born into a well-regarded family in Capernaum and grew up with a strong sense of duty to his people. Before becoming an apostle, Simon was an active merchant and a passionate member of the Zealots, a group that was dedicated to liberating the Jewish people from Roman oppression through militant action. His fiery temperament and belief in the cause made him a natural fit for this movement. And it's said that Simon was prone to speaking without thinking, often advocating for radical change. At the age of 28, Simon joined Jesus' group of apostles, marking the beginning of a significant transformation in his life. Despite his earlier revolutionary zeal, Simon was chosen by Jesus for his loyalty and fervent devotion to causes. One of Simon's key roles among the apostles was overseeing their diversions and recreational activities. He was not only efficient at this task, ensuring that the apostles had moments of respite, but he also became known for his ability to inspire and guide others in times of spiritual doubt. Simon was particularly effective when it came to guiding those who were undecided about entering the kingdom of God. With his unrelenting enthusiasm and passionate speeches, he would often convert individuals in a matter of minutes, clearing their doubts and helping them embrace salvation through faith. This ability to inspire was one of Simon's greatest strengths and demonstrated his deep personal devotion to Jesus and the message of the kingdom. However, Simon's spiritual journey was not without its struggles. His greatest weakness was his material-mindedness, particularly his difficulty in transitioning from being a Jewish nationalist focused on political and social revolution to someone who embraced the broader, more inclusive ideals of the kingdom of heaven. As a former zealot, Simon had been deeply focused on improving the social, economic, and political conditions of the Jewish people, believing that such challenges were critical to the coming of God's kingdom. This view conflicted with Jesus' teachings, which emphasized a spiritual kingdom rather than a political one. It was a struggle that Simon wrestled with throughout his time with Jesus. Although Jesus was patient with him and constantly sought to guide him, it was difficult for Simon to fully comprehend that the kingdom of heaven was not about immediate political action, but about embodying the will and character of God. One of the things that Simon admired the most about Jesus was his calmness and composure, qualities that stood in stark contrast to Simon's fiery temperament. Jesus' poise and assurance were traits that Simon deeply respected, especially as he witnessed the master face challenges without reacting with agitation or violence. This sense of inner peace and spiritual focus began to influence Simon, helping him gradually temper his own fiery nature. Over time, Simon's passionate revolutionary spirit was transformed into a powerful tool for preaching peace, goodwill, and spiritual salvation. He became known for his remarkable debating skills, particularly in interactions with intellectuals like the educated Jews and the Greeks. Simon was not only capable of fervently defending Jesus' teachings, but he also became one of the foremost advocates for peace and reconciliation, tirelessly preaching the message of the kingdom of heaven wherever he went. Despite his earlier identification with the party of protest, Simon shifted to embrace the higher concepts of the kingdom, which focused on spiritual growth, unity, and the eternal progression of truth and love. However, the challenges Simon faced in fully letting go of his nationalistic ideals were not easily overcome. Even after Jesus' teachings had begun to reshape Simon's heart, he continued to wrestle with the idea that the kingdom of heaven did not primarily concern itself with the political or social order of the world. Jesus frequently reminded him that while it was important to work for improvements in society, the core mission of the apostles was to represent God's spiritual kingdom. This teaching was difficult for Simon, but he eventually began to understand the deeper meaning of Jesus' message. The turning point for Simon came after the persecutions in Jerusalem, which led to the dispersion of the apostles. He was crushed by the loss of everything he had once hoped for as a Jewish nationalist. The loss of Jerusalem and the apparent failure of his earlier ideals sent Simon into a period of despair. He struggled with grief and confusion, wondering how he could continue to follow Jesus without the political and social transformation he had envisioned. However, over time, Simon found new hope and purpose in his faith. He rallied from his despair and set out to spread the gospel, carrying the message of Jesus far beyond his earlier confines. Simon traveled to Alexandria, where he began working his way up the Nile River into the heart of Africa. He preached tirelessly, baptizing believers and spreading the gospel wherever he went. Despite the challenges of old age and physical frailty, Simon remained dedicated to the mission until the end of his life. His journey from fiery revolutionary to spiritual advocate is a testament to the transformative power of Jesus' teachings and the profound impact that faith can have on an individual. In the end, Simon died and was buried in Africa, far from his homeland, But his legacy lived on through his work in spreading the gospel and bringing others to Christ. Through Simon's story, we see a deep personal transformation that can take place when a person encounters the teachings of Jesus. It is a story of struggle, growth, and ultimately redemption. Simon's transformation from a fiery nationalist to a preacher of peace and spiritual unity reflects the powerful impact of living in alignment with divine purpose rather than earthly politics. His life stands as a reminder of the patience, love, and understanding that Jesus extended to each of his followers, encouraging them to focus on the higher spiritual goals of the kingdom of heaven. Judas Iscariot. Judas Iscariot was born in Kerioth, a small town in southern Judea, and was later raised in Jericho with his parents that moved there. His family background was significant. His parents were Sadducees, members of a Jewish sect known for their political connections and strict adherence to the law of Moses. This upbringing likely shaped his early worldview, emphasizing tradition and status. However, Judas emerged from his path when he became inspired by the teachings of John the Baptist, a decision that led his parents to disowning him. This early familial rejection may have deeply impacted his sense of identity and self-worth, contributing to his later struggles. When Judas joined Jesus' 12 apostles, he was an experienced and intelligent man of 30, seeking work at a fish-drying enterprise near the Sea of Galilee. He was the only Judean among the group, which set him apart culturally and socially. Nathanael selected him, likely seeing his potential. Though Judas was well educated, arguably the most academically prepared among the apostles, he lacked certain spiritual and personal qualities, such as sincerity and self-awareness, which hindered his integration with the group. As treasurer, Judas demonstrated remarkable financial skill. Managing the resources of Jesus' mission required tact and organization, particularly given the diverse and sometimes chaotic dynamics of the apostles. Judas excelled in this role and gained the trust of his peers, none of whom doubted his dedication or abilities. His outward demeanor was cultured and polished, reflecting his upbringing and education. However, beneath the surface lay significant weaknesses: a lack of emotional maturity, unresolved inner conflicts, and a tendency towards critical and negative thinking. Judas admired Jesus' captivating personality, but struggled to overcome his own Judean prejudices against his Galilean companions. He often harbored private criticisms, even questioning Jesus' leadership, which he perceived as timid or overly passive. These thoughts revealed an inability to fully grasp Jesus' spiritual mission and values. Despite these internal conflicts, Judas was loved and respected by the other apostles, who remained unaware of his deeper struggles. His relationship with Jesus was marked by tension. While he may have believed in the Master's teachings, his heart lacked the full devotion that characterized the other apostles. Judas's early life as a pampered and spoiled only child may have contributed to his distorted sense of self-importance and fairness. He had a habit of interpreting others' actions through a lens of suspicion and resentment. Over time, these tendencies deepened, and his spiritual growth lagged significantly. While the other apostles grew in their understanding and commitment to the teachings of the kingdom, Judas remained mired in personal disappointment and bitterness. Jesus, fully aware of Judas's weaknesses, extended extraordinary grace and patience toward him. By allowing Judas to remain among the apostles, Jesus demonstrated a profound commitment to the principles of forgiveness and opportunity. This inclusivity underscored the message that salvation is available to all, regardless of their doubts or flaws. However, Judas failed to respond to these efforts. While he intellectually grasped Jesus' teachings, he did not internalize them in a way that transformed his character. Judas's growing resentment came to a head during a critical incident in which a woman anointed Jesus with an expensive incense. Judas, viewing the act as wasteful, publicly criticized it, only to have his protest dismissed and rebuked by Jesus. This event marked a turning point, crystallizing Judas's long-held grievances and setting him on the path of betrayal. His decision to betray Jesus was not motivated by greed. He was financially loyal, but rather by a desire to get even and assert his perceived grievances, much like my last story I gave you. Even as Judas carried out his plan to betray Jesus, he experienced moments of regret and shame. At one time, he even rationalized that Christ Michael would miraculously get himself out of the trouble Judas had placed him in attempting to ease his conscience. These fleeting emotions suggest that he was not entirely devoid of conscience, but he was ultimately unable to overcome his darker impulses, just like the story of the psychotherapist I discussed earlier. His final act, selling Jesus for 30 pieces of silver, symbolized the culmination of his inner turmoil and failure to reconcile with his own flaws. Tragically, after the betrayal, Judas succumbed to despair and committed suicide, fleeing from the consequences of his actions rather than seeking redemption. The apostles were devastated by Judas's betrayal, while Jesus viewed him with pity rather than anger. Throughout history, Judas's name has become synonymous with treachery and disloyalty with many planets in our local universe, finding it difficult to forgive Judas. His story serves as a cautionary tale about the dangers of unchecked resentment and, of course, falling to our own beastly tendencies. The importance of self-awareness and the consequences of failing to embrace spiritual growth were also themes associated with this story. Judas's life is a profound story of human frailty, moral freedom, and the challenges of personal transformation. It illustrates the complex interplay between divine grace and individual responsibility, highlighting both the potential for redemption and the tragedy of missed opportunities. Conclusion. Resentment is a powerful inhibitor of progress. The true path to iniquity has nothing to do with human error, but rather has to do with making the mistake of justifying and consequently internalizing the false reality that the error was the correct thing to do. One thing I learned from my shift coordinator days is to praise in public and reprimand in private that great managers secretly already do. When someone is doing something wrong, not only does having an audience detract and distract from the message you are attempting to convey, but more importantly, it has a tendency of making such a correction intensely personal. This personal reaction might turn into resentment, leading to the point of vengeance for some, result in feelings of justification for their actions. For those of you that don't know, it's also one of the reasons why many counselors in my field often prefer the word negative consequence over punishment. Negative consequences ultimately has the best interests of the offender at heart, searching for a growth opportunity due to the offense, while a punishment is typically viewed as a form of retaliation seeking to cause discomfort or inconvenience onto the offender. It's almost like a "you hurt me and now I'm going to hurt you" mindset. Zealots and Iscariot both had unresolved anger issues, with Simon acting more outwardly and Judas having more of an internal conflict with themselves. I would imagine the pity that Christ Michael was experiencing had more to do with the arduous journey ahead for Judas, rather than feeling sorry for anything Judas was about to do. After all, the finger of judgment that points to others around you will eventually find itself pointing back at oneself. With Judas Iscariot, this finger pointing backward was just too much for such a judgmental individual to handle that led to a disastrous outcome. Consequently, people that learn to forgive other people are more proficient and eventually forgiving themselves. All right, guys, I will see you on the next episode.